Good morning, everybody. It's another nice Taco Tuesday, and I'm excited for a couple of reasons. Of course, I get to do a baseball show, 11 games to talk about, and I'm doing a baseball show with Neil. And Neil and I have done not baseball, we've done plenty of football shows together, never a baseball show. So I'm excited for that. We are sponsored by PrizePicks. Do his favorite, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Do it for Neil. Neil doing a baseball show for the first time. So we really need these likes and subscriptions just for our own egos here. So we know that Neil and I could really pull these shows off together. Neil, what's going on?
As I was saying before the show, this is around the time I usually wake up. I am not a morning person at all, so getting up super early to do this show. So give us some likes because I got up early to do it.
Yeah, and it's if I'm not mistaken, it is 10 a.m. your time.
It is 10 a.m. my time.
Yeah, this is brutally early for a DFS.
This is so early for me.
This is unforeseen territory. Neil doesn't even know what it sounds like. There's birds in the morning, the sunlight, dew on the ground. Neil's never experienced any of these things.
I hate this. Yeah,
it's brand new. So as Neil said, also you got to like and subscribe to the video just because Neil has gone out of his way to get up egregiously early, as if he's a real working man for this show. So show him some respect. As for today's slate, like I said, 11 games, there's a lot of spots to talk about. So let's just get right into it. And I think we're kind of starting this off right because Neil, being from the Minnesota area, currently wearing a Minnesota Timberwolves hat, the first game on the slate we have to talk about is the Minnesota Twins against the Baltimore Orioles. And we're going to start with one of the top pitching options on the slate, Joe Ryan, who's been outstanding thus far in his rookie season for the Twins. 30.1% K rate, 2.68 expected ERA. He's now one of the betting favorites to win the American League Rookie of the Year. We also have somebody in chat who's asking, do we like Joe Ryan over 6.5 strikeouts? Well, good news for you, 2K plug 23, because according to our player props tool, the over 6.5 strikeouts for Joe Ryan, which could be found at plus money, we have with a 25% expected ROI. So that does look like a good bet. For DFS purposes, where do you stand on Joe Ryan today?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot to like about him. A 30% strikeout rate is nothing to sneeze at. Everything that I do starts with the top pitchers tool and the top stacks tool. So I look right away at what our simulations are showing, and we're seeing a 23% chance of being a top two pitcher on the slate, which is the highest of any pitcher on the board. Obviously, I love the 23% top two pitcher rate, but he is coming in at 33.3% ownership right now. Obviously, we have 8 hours until lock, so I'm hoping the ownership comes down some. I don't really expect it to, just because he looks really good. I mean, it's a great matchup at Baltimore in Camden Yards, which is no longer a hitter's park, or at least it hasn't been so far this year. They move back the fences, move up the fences. We'll see as the weather warms up. Maybe it's not quite as much of a pitcher's park as it has been so far this year, but so far this year it's been a pitcher's park, and it's obviously a great matchup against the Orioles. So there is a lot to like about Joe Ryan, but just based on the top pitchers tool, currently what I see, I would probably be underweight to Joe Ryan, not because of anything related to his projection or him as a pitcher, but just because he's coming in a little bit over-owned, given that it's an 11-game slate.
So to your reference before about this potentially being a pitcher's park now and the change in dimensions of the ballpark, thus far this season, the Camden Yards ballpark in Baltimore, the second most favorable pitcher's park in all of baseball. Now, it's a small sample size, it's new dimensions. How is that going to change moving forward? You also mentioned when the weather changes, that could have an impact. We'll see, but historically, this has always been one of the most hitter-friendly parks, and it has not been the case at all with the change in dimensions. And you also couple that with the Baltimore Orioles having a fairly shitty offense. And it's easy to see why there haven't that many runs scored here. But on the other side, it is 11-game slate. There's a lot of offenses to choose from. Baltimore, like we said, them not having great offense going up against Joe Ryan. Is it fair to assume you don't have much interest in them as a stack?
Yeah, let me check out the top stacks tool. Yeah. Yes. I mean, they look okay in the top stacks tool. They're coming in at 1.6% ownership. So that's the one part that I do really like about this is the ownership, but it is an 11-game slate. So even with the 1.6% ownership, they're coming in at a 1.3% chance of being a top stack, 8.7% chance of being a top value stack. So the things that you like about the Baltimore offense is they're relatively inexpensive. And I guess and the low ownership. And then I guess you could argue that, we don't really know that Joe Ryan is this good. He's obviously doesn't have a ton of starts in his career. He played he pitched some last year as well, but still he's relatively young in his career. So you never know when that's going to flip. And maybe we're going to learn that he's not quite the pitcher that he has been so far. Obviously, I hope that he remains this good. Probably not as good as he has been so far this year, but you can always kind of target rookie pitchers and hope that, maybe the control gets out of hand. Maybe he's comes out of the game early just because he doesn't have it today. And I'd say those are the arguments for going to the Baltimore stack, is just that, they're going up against a rookie pitcher. They're 1.6% owned. They're not a great offense, but they have some decent bats in there. So I have a little bit of interest in the Baltimore stacks, even though they're clearly not my top favorite stack on the slate.
It's very rare that a team is projected for 1.6% ownership and project to be over-owned in our top stacks tool. So,
yeah.
It's 11 games. There's a lot of spots to choose from. I certainly think there are better spots to get to. One thing that's going to be interesting on the other side of the game, Bruce Zimmerman is starting for Baltimore, and he's been very good so far to start the year, which, once again, maybe this speaks to how much more pitcher-friendly Camden, the ballpark in Camden has been. Maybe it also speaks to the fact that almost every pitcher has looked good so far this year because of the suppressed offense. One thing that I really took note of when I was writing down the pitcher stats for today is I'm kind of going there like, wow, this guy's pitched better than expected. Wow, this guy's pitched better than expected. Oh, this guy too, he's pitched better than I expected. And you start to pick up a trend. It's like, oh, maybe every pitcher just looks good when you're looking at the data now because of the depressed scoring across baseball. But Bruce Zimmerman, 26.3% K rate, 3.66 expected ERA. The Twins, they have a fairly low implied team total of 4.2, yet this is one of the most popular stacks on the slate. The Minnesota Twins, 8% projected ownership, somewhat significant over on DraftKings for a slate of this size. And then over on FanDuel, when it comes to the Minnesota Twins, they're projected for 7% ownership. This is one of the more negatively leveraged teams on the entire slate. Bruce Zimmerman hasn't been good in the past, has been so far this year. What do you make of this matchup?
I mean, again, I start with the top pitchers tool. I look at the fact that he's coming in at 1.8% ownership with a 7% chance of being a top 2 pitcher and an 18.4% chance of being a top value. A lot of times I look at these pitchers that, generally pitchers that are low owned are under owned in the top stacks tool. I guess, a pattern that you see over and over. Oh, this guy comes in at 0.5% owned and he has a 3% chance of being the top pitcher. But then I do a crunch to see, will I actually get some of this pitcher naturally? And I actually do get to some Bruce Zimmerman naturally just when I run crunches. So he actually projects well enough that he gets into crunches without me having to do anything to force him in. And I'm getting about 7% Bruce Zimmerman, which is about where I want to get just based on the top pitchers tool. I want to get above the field, and I probably want to get above his top 2 pitcher odds of 7%. So I'm definitely happy to get to some Bruce Zimmerman. The Twins, you say 4.2 implied run total, which looks pretty middling on this slate. It's not the best matchup in the world. The Twins definitely have some pop, but the ballpark helps. The 6,100 price tag helps. There is a lot to like about Bruce Zimmerman. So I think I'm going to be above the field if he really does come in under 2% ownership.
Yeah, and then once again, also, it's just there's so much ownership going to that Twin side. They look negatively leveraged, so I don't hate that at all. One thing I've said that when it comes to some of these pitchers, we don't have that much data on. I try to rely on the Zips and Steamer projection, just say like, all right, what do these projection sources say about these pitchers going forward? And it is so wildly different across Zips and Steamer, where Steamer has him being an adequate pitcher this year. Zips does not. They project him for a 5.2 ERA the rest of the way. So there's a really wide range of outcomes here. I'm not really sure anybody knows what to do with Bruce Zimmerman, just from a projection standpoint moving forward. But he has pitched really well so far. Are you going to look to stack the Twins against him at all as a fairly negatively leveraged offense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to completely fade the Twins, and it's not just because I love them. Even though they have negative leverage, they are still a great, a great stack. They still project well in terms of their top stack odds. They're a little bit over-owned, but they have a 4.9% chance of being the top stack on the slate. So that relative to the 8% ownership, I don't love it, but I'm still not going to full fade them. They are a team with a lot of great righties going up against Bruce Zimmerman, who struggles with righties. So, I can definitely see targeting Buxton, Correa, Polanco, going basically down the line, Gio Urshela. They all project pretty well. So I don't want to full fade the Twins. You could just, full fade them in your primary stacks and maybe go to the Twins more in your secondary stacks just because they are coming in over owned, but they look good in a vacuum. If you ignore the ownership, just when you factor in the ownership, I'm not going to have 10% of the Twins because right now they are over owned, but I'm not going to full fade them. They're just too dangerous of an offense in a matchup that, as you said, Bruce Zimmerman, probably not a great pitcher. And, the Baltimore bullpen also not great. So I'm happy to go to the Twins at some number.
All right, so let's move on now. You just mentioned dangerous offense, and here's a couple more of them: New York Yankees, Toronto Blue Jays. And I think we should start by talking about Alek Manoah, who another guy has looked very, very good to this point in the season. But this one was more expected, not along the lines of like a Bruce Zimmerman or some of the other pitchers that have been standouts to this point. Manoah was great last year. He is outstanding stuff. 25.8% K rate so far this year, 2.16 expected ERA. And here's the big thing for me about whenever a top end pitcher is going up against the Yankees. If it goes poorly, it's going to go very poorly because of the amount of power in the Yankees offense. But on the other side, if a pitcher is going well against the Yankees, they're going to generate a lot of strikeouts because there are so many swing and misses to be had in the Yankees lineup. So Manoah, I view as a very high variance play. I wouldn't want to roster him in cash games. For tournaments, though, he's a pretty high priority for me because once again, if he's pitching well today, he's going to get a lot of strikeouts against the Yankees. There's a lot of upside to be had, and he's not all that popular right now. He's projected for 14% ownership on DraftKings, 5% on FanDuel. He's expensive, but I think he's somebody I want to be overweight to in this spot. How are you viewing Manoah?
Yeah, I'm totally on the same page with you there. It's not that often you find a pitcher with this much upside at this low ownership, coming in at 14% ownership with a 25.8% strikeout rate so far this year. He's got a 16.4% chance of being one of the top two pitchers on the slate. I get it. People don't want to target the Yankees. It makes sense. The Yankees have a great offense, but as you said, this is baseball. Oftentimes, even the best teams in baseball can go hitless or can go runless at least, for 7 innings, no problem. And a pitcher like Alek Manoah can certainly do well against the Yankees. So yeah, you want to take advantage of the high variance spots, and this is a high variance spot for GPPs. Obviously, as you said, not a cash game play at all. You're not targeting the Yankees in cash. He's 9,700, so he's more expensive than a lot of the other pitchers that people are targeting who also have upside. So I guess that also accounts for the low ownership, but as you said, just under owned relative to his upside. So I'm happy to be above the field on Manoah.
Yeah, and I think we're pretty much on the same page there. But then as it comes to the Yankees also, and I've mentioned this, numerous times over the last couple of years, when we have a team like the Yankees or the Blue Jays that isn't going to be popular, that's an interesting GPP stack for me because there's so much power upside there. And the Yankees, they project for 0.6% ownership as a team. Are they very likely to be the highest scoring team on the slate? Absolutely not. But it probably happens more than 0.6% of the time. For reference, we just mentioned the Baltimore Orioles in the first game. The Orioles have 3x the ownership of the Yankees right now. That shouldn't be the case, especially when our projections have the Yankees with about a 3x chance of being a top scoring stack. So I like Manoah, but I like the Yankees offense too. I think overall this is a pretty good GPP spot to target both sides just because there's not really much ownership going to either side when both of them have apparent upside.
Yep, 100% agree. As you mentioned, you like to target high variance spots. Well, this is a high variance spot on the pitcher side. It's also a high variance spot, of course, on the hitting side. So Yankees coming in at 0.6% ownership with a 3.2% chance of being the top stack. And they're the Yankees offense. If they can just get to Manoah early, then you have the rest of the game going up against the bullpen and you have just a dangerous offense. So anytime you get the Yankees at 0.6% ownership, I don't care who the pitcher is, I'm probably going to want to be overweight to them. So I definitely expect to be overweight to the Yankees here in one of the best leverage spots on the slate.
Yeah, I think we see that the same way. But then when it comes to Jameson Taillon pitching for the Yankees, I understand he isn't going to be very popular, but it's an 11-game slate. I don't think there's that many guys. I mean, I don't think we need to stretch our player pool that thin for me personally to actually want to roster Taillon against the Toronto Blue Jays. The Blue Jays also have really dangerous offense. Taillon has not been working very deep into games this year, which is kind of another little bit of a red flag against his upside here. Once again, strong numbers, but the numbers have been strong for legitimately almost every single pitcher. If you're just looking at some of the advanced stats, 21% K rate for Taillon. That's not great. It's not terrible either. 3.09 expected ERA. That's solid, but I'm not really going to have that much interest in him. I'm going to be looking more to get to the Toronto side. Although, once again, if I'm picking offenses in this game, I'm going to lean towards the Yankees over the Blue Jays. Similar top stack odds on both of them, but the Yankees are so much less popular, sub 1% ownership as compared to the over 3% ownership for the Blue Jays. So what are you going to be doing with Taillon going up against Toronto?
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you. He looks great in the top pitchers tool, coming in at 0.6% ownership with a 5.8% chance of being one of the top two pitchers. But as you said, it's a 11-game slate. We have 22 pitchers to choose from here, and I ran a crunch of 500, as I mentioned earlier, and didn't get to a single share of Tyone. So even though he looks great in the top pitchers tool, I'm probably not going to get to any. If you land, you have exactly 7,900 salary left after you build in your favorite stacks and find another pitcher. It's fine to get to Tyone just because, as I mentioned, he looks great in the top pitchers tool. But there are several pitchers who are cheaper than him who have a better chance of being one of the top two pitchers on the slate. So when that happens, I'm just not going to get to him, and I'm not going to force him in against Toronto. It's just not a great spot. So yeah, I think I'm with you. I'm probably a fade on Tyone. And then as far as the Blue Jays go, they're just a very neutral play on this slate. Happy to get to them. They're the Blue Jays. They're going up against Jameson Tyone. Of course, you can always play the Blue Jays, but coming in at 3.4% ownership on the stack with a 3.4% chance of being the top stack on the slate. Just not an offense that you really need to force in. If you get to the Blue Jays, of course, they have tons of upside, but they're not one of my favorite stacks on the slate.
Want to start your May off right? We have launched one of our best offers of the year. You get $7 for 7 days of Awesemo Plus Platinum. That's 75% off when you use the promo code Luca at checkout, or simply click on the link in the video description below. That'll get you access to tools for basically every single DFS sport out there. Once again, $7 for 7 days of Awesemo Plus Platinum using the promo code Luca. All right, let's move on to the next game on the slate, which is the Los Angeles Angels against the Boston Red Sox. Now, starting with Noah Syndergaard, he was scratched from his last start last week. It was against the or against the White Sox, I think, if memory serves correct. Either way, he was supposed to make a start, ended up getting pulled. Syndergaard's another guy. It's kind of hard to know what to make of him because he has missed so much time because of injuries over the last few years. Shoulder injury, elbow injuries, coming off Tommy John surgery. So 2021 last year, he pitched a total of 2 innings. 2020, he missed the entire season. Now we're getting him back. And, we've just seen so little out of him. At least what we've seen so far on the surface, the numbers look good, but it's not the same strikeout upside we've seen from him in the past. He is striking out 16.4% of the hitters he's faced compared to 26.1% for his career. Now, with that said, we're looking at a very small sample size, 17 innings, but his velocity is down as well. For his career, 98 average mile per hour fastball velocity, 95.2 so far for Syndergaard. Once again, relying on the Zips and Steamer projections for him, he looks like a quality pitcher projection-wise, 3.93 ERA on Zips, 4.32 on Steamer, but they are projecting the strikeouts to be down quite a bit from the peak Syndergaard we saw. I know, once again, there's a really wide range of outcomes with somebody who's such a talented pitcher coming back from a series of significant injuries. But how are you going to be viewing Syndergaard in this spot against the Red Sox? Which side do you prefer?
Yeah, I definitely prefer the Red Sox side. I'm not going to get to Syndergaard here at all. In my 500 crunch, I got to 0 shares. Again, he looks fine in the top pitchers tool, coming in at 0.9% ownership with a 7% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate. But I just look at it, there are so many pitchers who have a better chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate. Bruce Zimmerman is $6,100. It's $3,000 cheaper than Noah Syndergaard, both coming in at a 7% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate. So yeah, he just does not look great in the top pitchers tool. So I'm not going to be getting to any Noah Syndergaard against Boston. And then the Boston side, they have slight negative leverage in the top stacks tool. You can always go to the Red Sox, just a great offense. So I probably going to be getting to some Boston, not one of my favorite offenses on the slate, but coming in at 3.9% ownership with a 3.6% chance of being the top stack on the slate. They're slight negative leverage, but it's not something that's going to really deter me from getting to around the field on Boston, just because they are a solid offense, and they're, Noah Syndergaard is not a pitcher that really scares me. So I'm going to the Boston offense more than I'm going to Syndergaard here.
Yeah, and then on the other side, it's hard for me to not prioritize the Angels offense quite a bit. Once again, Michael Wacha, correct? I mean, if you've heard me say this yet, surprisingly good numbers so far for Michael Wacha this year, 21.3% K rate, 3.37 expected ERA. The majority of pitchers just have an expected ERA to this point somewhere in the 3 range. But it's hard for me to buy into Michael Wacha when you consider how much he's struggled the last few years. 2021, he had a 5.47 expected ERA, 2020, 4.51, 2019, 5.74 expected ERA, 2018, 5.23 expected ERA. There was a point in time where Michael Wacha was a really good pitcher. I think those days are behind him. I understand that he's had a good start in his first 20 innings of the year. I don't buy into it. The Angels have a really good offense. They have one of the highest odds of being a top stack on the slate, 7.2% over on DraftKings. It is the 3rd highest mark on the slate. over on FanDuel, where generally we're going to see about the same numbers across the two sites, but 6.9% also top 3 stack on the entire slate. I'm going to be prioritizing the Angels against Michael Wacha. Will you?
Yep, I will also. Waka, I got 1 share in my 500 lineup, so I guess he did make the cut, but looks fine. 1% ownership, obviously like that. 6.8% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate, but just not a priority for me. There are just so many pitchers that are cheaper or around the same price that look so much better than Waka, so I'm not going to be getting to probably any shares when it comes down to my 150 set. And then in terms of the Angels, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, 6.9% ownership, 7.2% top stack odds. There's no offense that really stands out on this slate as like, wow, this offense looks incredible. Like their top stack odds relative to their ownership. But the Angels are one of the better options in terms of having a decent chance of being the top stack and also having positive leverage. The Angels coming in at, as we said, 6.9% ownership, 7.2% top stack. So they are the 3rd highest likelihood of being the top stack on the slate, but they are the highest likelihood of teams with positive leverage. So they are a team that if you're doing a single entry, I think the Angels are a team that you could target.
Yeah, and once again, it's a team, like I said, it's going to be a fairly high priority for me. And there's rarely going to be a time on an 11 game slate where there's an offense that I have, like 10, even like 10 plus percent exposure to. But the Angels will be in that area. It's a very high priority on this particular slate for me. The next game to talk about, we're going to be mixing it up a little bit because not only do we have finally bad pitchers to talk about, the offenses suck also. Pittsburgh Pirates, Detroit Tigers, neither Bryce Wilson nor Michael Pineda have had much success this year. Pineda, his ERA looks good. The underlying numbers are horrific, though. His velocity is down. And considering his age, his history of cheating and injuries and all that, I think it's reasonable to expect Michael Pineda to drop off a cliff this year. 10.3% K rate, 6.3 expected ERA. Bryce Wilson for Pittsburgh, 15.2% K rate, 5.36 expected ERA. But like I said, neither of these offenses are particularly good, either the Pirates nor the Tigers. But the Tigers have a fairly high 4.8 implied team total. As a result, they are very popular on this slate. Do you like either of the pitchers here? And then what are you going to be doing with the offenses against these bad pitchers?
Yeah, so not really. So I don't love either of the pitchers. They both look fine in the top pitchers duel. Pineda coming in 3.3% ownership, 3.3% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, and then a 12.9% chance of being one of the top 2 value pitchers on the slate. So that looks pretty good for Pineda at 5,800, and Wilson coming in at 0.5% ownership with a 2.2% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate, 11.8% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers, top 2 value pitchers on the slate. Just the price tag is all you can really say about these guys that will make you want to get to them. In my 500 lineup set, I got to 0 shares of either of them. So neither of them just make it into my lineups naturally. Neither of them are guys that I really feel I need to target, even in great matchups for both of them. Obviously, you like the spot. They're just not good enough pitchers that I feel the need to really get there. And then, as you mentioned, Detroit just coming in way overowned relative to their top stack odds. And part of that could be that they do have positive leverage in terms of top value odds. So that is a number that I look for cheaper teams as well. So, you could argue that they are a decent stack because they allow you to get to better pitching and better secondary stacks. So coming in at 10.6% ownership on the Detroit stack with a 13.1% chance of being the top value stack on the slate. So in that sense, they make some sense to get there just because they do have a great matchup, and going to them allows you to get to a better lineup outside of that stack. But they're a 5.9% chance to be in the top stack. So they're just unlikely to put up a ton of runs. Really, the only reason you want to go there is because they're cheap. So maybe they make sense as more of a secondary stack, or if you want to do like a 4-3 stack or something, then maybe 4 Detroit batters would be fine. But I probably don't want to get to 5 Detroit batters in a lineup just because the upside really isn't there in this offense. And then in terms of Pittsburgh's offense, they actually have some positive leverage coming in at 4.7% ownership against Pineda, 4.9% top stack odds, and then 10.7% top value odds. That looks pretty good. I'd rather go to Pittsburgh than Detroit at the much lower ownership.
So a couple points for me on Detroit. First of all, as the numbers currently stand, this is not a team that I'm going to stack. If the ownership doesn't change, it's probably a team I'll just leave out of my player pool. If I was to stack them, I will say this. I think it makes sense to, number one, add in a couple of batters from the back of the lineup that are less popular, because a lot of the ownership is being driven by the top of the order. Javi Baez projected for 18% ownership, Robbie Grossman 15%, Torkelson, Meadows each 12%. You could get guys who are 4 or 5% on Jonathan Scope, Miguel Cabrera, if you're looking more towards the middle or back end of the lineup. But something else also, if you're going to be rostering a very chalky Tiger stack, maybe it also makes sense mix in a more contrarian pitcher. If you're going Tigers and then just saying like Joe Ryan and Brandon Woodruff, I mean, that is just going to be uber popular today. I think that's going to be one of the most popular builds on the slate. So I wouldn't quite go down that route. At least mix up your pitchers if you do go down the Tigers route, which once again, I'm not going to be doing, and it looks like Neil is going to be underweight as well. We have another very popular pitcher to talk about in the next game. Milwaukee Brewers are at home against the Cincinnati Reds. The Reds are unfathomably bad to this point in the season. They don't win ever. They lose almost every single game. What is their record at now? I know it's the worst in baseball by a pretty wide margin, but I want to see for sure where they're at in the standings, because it is, here we go, 3-19. That's not great, Neil.
That's not great.
It's almost impressive though. You think baseball, somewhat high variance game, you'd win some of those games by accident. Joey Votto's on TikTok now. That seems suboptimal either way. 3-19 start for the Reds in 22 games. As a result, Brandon Woodruff is super popular on DraftKings, projected for 43% ownership. Over on FanDuel is also pretty popular at 30% ownership. That's a lot for a single pitcher site. Here's the key. He is just way underpriced on DK. I don't know how the algorithm shot out an 8,900 salary for Brandon Woodruff going up against the Reds. So I think if you're playing cash games, you want to play Brandon Woodruff today. DraftKings and FanDuel, I think he's the guy to get to in cash. For tournaments, though, what are you going to be doing with a pitcher who appears to maybe be a little bit overowned, but also has a very good matchup and is underpriced?
Yeah, so he's way overowned. Just based on the top pitchers. So coming in at 43.4% ownership right now with a 20.2% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. I think he's the most overowned pitcher on this slate, according to the top pitchers tool. Now, I'm going to talk to Terry later, and it wouldn't surprise me if Terry tells me play all the Brandon Woodruff, because that has happened before. And every time Terry tells me something like that, that goes against the top pitchers tool. I think Brandon Woodruff specifically, he always has done better than expected. So I'll wait to see what Terry says. But typically, I trust in Terry with these kind of decisions, but just based on the top stacks tool right now, I don't love Brandon Woodruff. I will probably be underweight to him just because his top 2 pitcher odds are half of his ownership, and that's, you don't like to see that. So it's nothing against Brandon Woodruff. It's a great matchup. He's a great pitcher. It's just that the ownership coming in at 43.4% on an 11-game slate is just too high for me. So I would rather take bets on other pitchers than a guy who's coming in at 43.4% ownership. And then the Reds on the other side look a little bit underowned, as teams generally do when they're going against chalky pitchers. 0.6% ownership with a 2% chance of being the top stack on the slate and a 5.9% chance of being the top value stack on the slate. That looks really good. Probably not one of the first few teams I go to, but in a 150 set, I'm going to try to get overweight to the Reds and just hope that something happens and Woodruff comes out of the game early.
Yeah, so for me, I don't mind chalk pitchers as much as chalk offenses, and I just think there's so much floor and ceiling with Woodruff. I'm just going to play him. I don't really care. The Reds suck. He's underpriced. And Woodruff, I understand people might look at, once again, we were having a discussion in the YouTube chat about ERA versus expected ERA and whatnot. Woodruff has been so good for so long, and his underlying numbers are really good this year. I just don't care that he has a 5.3 ERA. He had one really awful start against the Cubs to open the year, and that's something that will really screw up your ERA in the early going of the season. The underlying stats, though, he's a 3.16 expected ERA. He's a 2.65 FIP. The strikeout rate is still solid. It's going to be better. He's at 23%. He's 28% for his career. The strikeouts are going to come up. The walk rate's going to come down a little bit. I have no concerns about Woodruff going forward. And then also his recent starts have looked much better than what some of his older starts were. And then, last few starts, last couple of starts, 6 strikeouts, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts, 2 walks. So I think we see him get better moving forward. I'm going to be rostering him in this spot against the Reds. I understand that maybe he's a little bit overowned. I'm more concerned about that typically with offenses, though, than with pitchers, like I said.
I am too. Generally, I try to get more different with the bats than the pitchers. So I don't care as much about Woodruff going on over on. It's just a matter of 43.4% on an 11-game slate just seems so high. But really, top 2 pitcher odds, as I've said on previous shows, so if he's the 3rd best pitcher on the slate and you have 70% of him, are you going to be disappointed? Probably not. He's probably still putting up 25 fantasy points, and that's just fine. So I get it. I don't see any reason. There's nothing wrong with going overweight to Woodruff. Typically, the way I play, I'm probably just going to set a cap that's lower than 43%. But I think that makes perfect sense that you are fine getting overweight to him too.
Yeah, and then on the other side, we have another pitcher in Tyler Mahle, who's also run into some bad luck this year because he also has an inflated ERA, he has suffered from some bad batting average on balls in play luck. So 23.5% K rate, 2.88 expected ERA. But once again, the ERA doesn't look great at 6.45. But the main reason for that is a 388 batting average on balls in play for Tyler Mahle. For his career, he's a 307 BABIP. Something else that's killed him is just sequencing. So it's not just the balls that are being put on in play against him, but he's a 54.1% strand rate. So here's what these numbers tell me. A lot of balls are getting put in play that wouldn't normally be hits that are leading to hits, and they're happening consecutively to him. So the strand rate is really low. Tyler Mahle, I think he's a good pitcher, particularly for fantasy purposes, because he generates a lot of strikeouts. I think he's a good contrarian option to get to, especially on DraftKings single pitcher site. He's only 6,900. He's projected for sub 10% ownership. There's strikeout upside with Mahle. The Brewers have a good but not great offense. And then Mahle also over on FanDuel, a little less appealing on a single pitcher site, but I still think is playable at 7,500. This is going to be a contrarian pitcher in my player pool. Will he be in yours?
Yeah, I really like Tyler Mahle today. As you mentioned, in the top pitchers tool, coming in at 8.4% ownership, 8.7% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, and then 14.2% chance of being a top 2 value pitcher. I looked at my 500 crunch where I set the cap at 24% on pitchers. That's just kind of to get an idea of, am I getting this pitcher naturally? And I get to 23.8% Tyler Mahle. So he's just below all of the pitchers that look really good. He's still, I'm getting to near the cap of what I set on pitchers in my 500 crunch. So just based on his projection, I'm getting to a lot of Tyler Mahle. And then the top pitchers tool agrees with that. So I would expect to be well over the field on Tyler Mahle if he really does come in at 8.4% ownership.
Yep, same page for me. Just a product of, number one, decent enough pitcher, but when he does have good starts, it generally comes via strikeout. So I think that makes sense. On the other side, though, there are times he gives up a little bit of hard contact. The ERA, like I said, I don't think it's going to remain this high, but he is a guy who's been prone to blow up outings at times. And with this game being played in Milwaukee, a hitter-friendly park, do you have any interest in stacking the Brewers against him?
Yep, this is another high variance spot where you can take advantage of that on both sides. So I'm going to play Mahle, and then in my non-Mahle lineups, I'll have plenty of Milwaukee coming in at 4.8% ownership, 5.1% chance of being the top stack. So a little bit of positive leverage that I'm perfectly happy getting to Milwaukee and getting above the field there as well.
All right. So, yeah, I think we're on the same page there. Brewers not going to be a high priority stack for me, but they're going to be in the player pool just because I do think there's a lot of variance, both with Mahle and then the Brewers offense going against them, because Mahle, as Tyler might know, sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit. That's the way that
that's an MMA fighter, right?
Whatever. I thought I was trying to queue up Tyler for the drop, but it looks like maybe not on. Maybe not. It's all right, Tyler.
I don't know.
Tyler's
it's all right. No big deal. We'll move on to the next game where we've got a battle of the Chicago team. Chicago White Sox, a little bit of a struggle coming out of the gate. The Cubs, they were not expected to be good this year, but they've overachieved, particularly on offense, when they've had a hitter like Seiya Suzuki in the middle of their lineup, who's immediately come over from Asia and become one of the better hitters in all of the MLB. So we have this game, somewhat tight here on the money line. White Sox, a small favorite, but also a really low total in this game. We have Michael Kopech going up against Drew Smyly. Considering that the total in this game is only set at 7 runs, what are you going to be doing with the pitchers? Did Neil freeze?
I just lost your sound. Did I freeze? Am I back?
You're back. Am I back?
I can hear you now.
Back?
I can hear Greg.
Okay. All right. Well, that's so here. The crux of the question: low total in the Chicago game. We've got 2 pitchers on the mound, in Drew Smyly and Michael Kopech. What are you going to be doing with the pitchers in a game with such a low total?
Yeah, so we're in Wrigley, and currently we're expecting winds coming 20 miles per hour towards the field, so that really helps the pitching. So both pitchers are going to look pretty good just based on the low total and the winds helping them out. But Kopech coming in over-owned. He's 9,300 coming in at 31.5% ownership on an 11-game slate. He has an 18.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, 8.7% chance of being a top 2 value pitcher. So I'm going to be underweight to Kopech, even though he looks great in this matchup against the Cubs. And then on the other side, we've got Drew Smyly, who looks good actually in the top pitchers duel, coming in at 0.8% ownership with a 3.9% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers, 2.1% chance of being one of the top 2 value pitchers. It doesn't look like I'm getting to any Drew Smyly naturally in my crunch. I am getting to Michael Kopech. He reaches my cap of 24%, so I do naturally get to a good amount of Kopech, and that makes sense. But that's why I'm trying to set my cap to get underweight to pitchers who are going over-owned. So I'm going to be probably underweight to Kopech, but he's another pitcher that he might make sense in cash. Like he's looks good for his salary in this matchup. I think he's a totally fine pitcher if you want to go there. He's just going a little bit over-owned in large field GPPs.
And then as far as the offenses go, for me, number one, I think both these pitchers are decent enough. But the other point, too, is when the wind's blowing in at Wrigley, sure, I mean, you could have a team at any point scores a few runs, but there isn't that much home run upside when there's a game at Wrigley Field with the wind blowing in. So I do think it's something that's kind of hard to quantify with numbers, and I'm more apt to just kind of take the White Sox and Cubs out of my player pool from stacking purposes because of the weather conditions. Is that something you consider at all, or do you like getting to either of the Chicago offenses?
Yeah, so I think that does make sense. If you know that a game is very unlikely to put up a lot of runs or put up a lot of home runs in particular, it makes sense to fully fade the game. I think that the counter argument would be it's hard to predict the weather, I guess. So maybe it's not as hard as I think it is, but if the winds are still projected for 20 miles per hour at 6 o'clock, that might make some sense. The White Sox look okay in the top stacks tool, coming in at 1.9% ownership with a 3.8% chance of being the top stack on the day. So they actually look pretty great in the top stacks tool, just relative to their ownership. So I think I could go either way. You could argue this either way. I think that it does make sense to, if there is not upside for a lot of home runs, it does make sense to just remove the teams from the player pool. What are the chances that some player is going to hit 2 home runs in a game with winds blowing in at 20 miles per hour? Which really, when you're full fading a team, that's what you're afraid of. You're not afraid of a single home run. You're afraid of 2 home runs or a grand slam. So I think that it does make some sense what you're saying. I think that I'm probably not going to full fade them. I would be more apt to full fade the Cubs, coming in at 0.6% ownership with a 1.2% chance to be the top stack. There's some positive leverage there, but it's still such low odds that I don't totally mind fading the Cubs. I'd be a little bit more hesitant to full fade the White Sox.
Yeah, and then before we move off this game, just a shout out to our MLB player props tool, because this number, just based on the eye test, does appear to be pretty far off. Michael Kopech has an over-under of 5.5 strikeouts. We have the over hitting 75% of the time, so our highest expected ROI bet of the day at 45%. So that is definitely a bet that I think is worth taking advantage of, and I assume that's going to move before too long, because Michael Kopech is a really good strikeout pitcher. The Cubs offense, once again, has been good so far this year, but I don't really buy that being sustainable. So Michael Kopech over 5.5 strikeouts. Take advantage of that and do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm moving on to the second half of the slate, and we have the St. Louis Cardinals against the Kansas City Royals. Dakota Hudson on the mound for St. Louis, Brad Keller for Kansas City. To start, I don't have that much interest in either of the pitchers. Big slate. I think there's spots where we can get more strikeout upside. Both Hudson and Keller sub 20% K rates. It's actually sub 19% K rates. 18.9% for Keller, 18.2% for Dakota Hudson. Do you like anything about these pitchers, or are you with me? Or like, I'll look elsewhere?
Yeah, so they both, again, they're coming in at so low ownership that they're going to look fine in the top stack. So that's just kind of how it goes. Baseball is a high variance sport, but I don't know that I really need to go this deep on an 11-game slate. There's just better options. Dakota Hudson, as I said, 0.5% ownership, 7.1% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers on the site. So that's a good. Brad Keller, 1.7% ownership, 5.7% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on the slate. That looks good too. But when I look at my crunch of 500 lineups, I got to 0 Brad Keller shares and 1 Dakota Hudson share. And that's across 500 lineups. So I don't expect to get to any of either of these pitchers in my 150 set. And I'm totally fine with that. I don't see any reason to really target them.
And then as far as it goes, when it comes to stacking against these pitchers, do either of these offenses really stand out to you? I have a feeling one of them is going to.
Yeah, St. Louis looks great in the top stacks tool, 1.2% ownership with a 4.4% chance of being the top stack on the slate. That's really good. That's one of the best leverage spots on the entire slate. Just too low owned, and a 1.9% chance of being the top value stack. So even some positive leverage there. I really like St. Louis in this spot. And then Kansas City also looks pretty good, to be honest. 1.8% ownership with a 2.1% chance of being the top stack, and then a 6.9% chance of being the top value stack. So they just look like a pretty good value spot to save some money. So I actually like both offenses in this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not that much ownership. And the pitchers, once again, I don't think these pitchers suck. But once again, relative to the other pitchers on the slate, everybody kind of looks decent if you're just looking at the numbers. Like we have, how many pitchers on the slate have an expected ERA this year over 4? There's Bryce Wilson and Michael Pineda who are in the same game. We've got Dakota Hudson. We've got Chris Flexen, we're going to talk about in a second. We've got the Coors Field game. And that's it. Every single other pitcher has an expected ERA in the mid 3s or below. There's a lot of good pitching on this slate. And once again, I don't think either of these pitchers are bad, but these offenses aren't picking up that much ownership. And relative to the other pitchers today, I do think Dakota Hudson and Brad Keller are 2 of the weaker pitchers. Therefore, I'm with you. I think these are good contrarian offenses to get to and ones that I'll be overweight to in my build. The next game we have to talk about the Houston Astros at home against the Seattle Mariners. And we'll start by talking about one of the pitchers who I just mentioned does have an expected ERA over 4 this year. Chris Flexen, he has really struggled, 15.6% strikeout rate, 4.93 expected ERA. Flexen's kind of had a weird career in terms of he had really good minor league results. Then he got called up to the big leagues, never really worked out, went pitched overseas and found a little bit more success, but doesn't really have the best stuff. And at least to this point this year, it appears that it's been a little bit problematic for him to really get hitters out, especially when he's giving up that much contact. The Houston Astros have one of the better offenses in baseball. So this is a team also that I'm going to be prioritizing. They're projected for about fair ownership on DraftKings, a little bit over-owned on FanDuel. I like the Astros offense, especially considering the profile that Chris Flexen has. I just don't think being a pitcher who pitches to contact against an offense like the Houston Astros is all that great of a way to approach them. So I like stacking Houston. Do you?
Yeah, I do as well. I like that you skipped right over whether we're going to play Chris Flexen, because it just goes without saying we're not playing Chris Flexen today. But the Houston Astros, they're the 4th highest odds of any stack to be the top stack on the slate. So coming at 6.8% top stack odds, slight negative leverage, essentially neutral, 7.2% ownership. They're just a dangerous offense against a pitcher that's not that great. So plenty of reason to go to Houston today. I'm with you definitely on playing some Houston.
Yeah, so we're on the same page. There's so much firepower in that offense. 4.9 implied team total, one of the highest marks on the slate. Actually, the highest mark outside of the Coors Field game, which is going to be next. So Houston Astros, that's going to be a fairly high priority for me. Looking at the starting pitcher for the Houston Astros, I'm pretty surprised to just look at some of the numbers Christian Javier has put up so far this year. Not say he's been a bad pitcher in the past, but we've never seen this kind of strikeout upside for him. 31.4% K rate, 2.6 expected ERA. He's looked very, very solid this year. Is he somebody you're at all interested in? And what are you going to be doing with the Mariners on the other side?
Yeah, so actually, this is another high variance spot where I like both sides of the game. Christian Javier looks pretty good in the top pitchers tool. Comes in a slight negative leverage, 12.5% ownership and a 10.9% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers, but then an 18% chance of being one of the top 2 value pitchers. So just his 6,800 price tag really allows you to do a lot with your lineup. So I do like Christian Javier. I'll probably be above the field. In fact, that my crunch that I did of 500 lineups, I got to Christian Javier at the max 24% of my lineup. So just among the value options, he looks as good as anybody. He's probably the best pitcher on the board for his price tag. I do expect to get to plenty of Christian Javier, but then I also expect to get to plenty of Seattle offense. They're coming in at 1.2% ownership for the stacks with a 4.8% chance of being the top stack on the board. I'm going to totally get above the field on Seattle. I like both sides of this game. It's just a high variance spot where one of them can do great. We just don't know which one it's going to be. How about you?
Yeah, it's going to kind of be the same for me. I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Christian Javier just because of the price point and how good he's looked so far this year. You know, when he's projected for 2.9% ownership over on DraftKings, that's pretty favorable. And then on DraftKings, it's not just that he has the 12.5% ownership, which is pretty modest. He's only 6,800. So I view him as a very solid SP2 option. For reference, if you look at our top pitchers tool on DraftKings, here are the pitchers here he's sandwiched in between. Alek Manoah is just above him, and Michael Kopech also just above Manoah, and then Julio Urias below him. So we've got Christian Javier sandwiched between pitchers who are far more expensive than him. Alek Manoah 9,700, Michael Kopech 9,300, and Julio Urias with lesser top pitcher odds below him at 8,400. He just looks really underpriced, especially relative to the success he's had so far this year. So I do like getting to him. Seattle will be in my player pool to an extent, but I expect I'm going to be underweight to them. And Javier is somebody who I really do like as a contrarian SP2 option. And then once again, if you're playing a really chalky stack, I think looking at somebody like Christian Javier as a somewhat different pitcher is a good way to go. And I think that is something that a lot of people are going to have to consider when we start talking about this next game, which is at Coors Field, the Washington Nationals, the Colorado Rockies. There's only one game on the slate with a total over 8.5 runs, and this is the Coors Field game with a double-digit total. The Nationals have a 5.4 implied team total, 6 implied team total for the Colorado Rockies. This is going to be the game with the most ownership by far. So let's go team by team. First, starting with the Washington Nationals, who I'm a little surprised to see be more popular than the Colorado Rockies, just from this standpoint. The Rockies are favored, and they have a far higher implied team total. I just mentioned a 0.6 implied run total difference. That's a really big deal when it comes to baseball. Yet the Nationals are more popular. So I'm going to prefer the Rocky side of the game. I'm going to be underweight to the Nationals, by far the most negatively leveraged team on the slate. How are you going to approach the Nationals when they have, fairly high 12% top stack odds, but they're projected for 20% ownership?
Yeah, I think you can probably guess. We've done enough shows together. You probably know exactly what I'm going to do. Yes, I'm going to be underweight to the Nationals, coming in, as you said, 19.7% ownership, but an 11.7% chance to be in the top stack. They're just over-owned. They do have a 14.1% chance to be in the top value stack. So that's a little bit better than the top stack odds, but still negative leverage there. I'll probably have under 10% of Washington, which is well under the field when the field's coming in at 19.7%. Colorado on the other side, I actually really like. They're probably one of the first teams that I would get to if I were doing a single entry. They're a little bit chalky, coming in at 14.5% ownership, slight negative leverage with a 14.1% chance to be in the top stack, but that's close enough to neutral, and that's high enough odds to be in the top stack that if you're just making one lineup or doing a single entry, I think that they're a totally fine spot to go. Probably not the first stack that I would go to, but they're definitely one of the first few that I would build a stack around.
Yeah. And then, once again, it's so much ownership going to the Nationals. And these are the spots I just try to avoid offenses like this. And it's not to say that if you're playing cash games for baseball, sure, play the Nationals because they're going to be so popular. It's Coors Field. It's a good spot. But at the same time, too, it's just way too much ownership. And I view it very similarly to Red Skittles in chat was mentioning the Cincinnati Reds last week, where they were egregiously priced, but the ownership was so high also that ultimately when it came to lock, I was like, I'm just going to cross my fingers. I'll take the Reds out of my player pool and see what happens. And some of those slates I was profitable just because I didn't play the Reds. The Reds were a team also that were projected for like 20% ownership that we had with something like 8 or 9% top stack odds. And they just didn't score runs in those games. So I think this is another one of these spots where I won't play Washington. And as a stack, at least, I'll probably have, some of Soto and Nelson Cruz and whatnot as a one-off. And then I just hope that anybody else is a top scoring stack on the slate. And we have about a 90% chance that somebody else outscores them. So the odds are in my favor, but every once in a while, you certainly will get your ass kicked in this scenario. As for the Rockies, if I submitted my build right now, the Rockies would be my most rostered team on the entire slate. Would it be the same for you?
Yeah, I think so. They'd certainly be up there. I believe they would be my most rostered because there's no other team that has, close to a neutral top stack odd versus ownership leverage score, but still has, they have the highest top stack odds on the slate. So yeah, I think they would probably be my highest owned stack.
Yeah, so that's what I would be doing if none of these numbers change. And then once again, you and Terry are going to be doing the baseball show later in the day. So you guys like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and check out everything that they are doing later on the day. It will certainly help in terms of building your baseball lineup, and they'll have a more updated look at the weather and the data and all that. Also, something else you guys should check out, Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. If you guys are signing up at Prize Picks for the first time and you use the promo code Awesemo, You get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit and 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum to get access to all the tools like the top pitchers tool, the top stacks tool that we use to help build our lineup. Something that I know for me personally, I wouldn't be able to build baseball lineups without, and I assume it would be the same for Neil based on some of the conversations we've had about the tools over at Awesemo.com. One more question I have for you about this game. Considering how popular the Washington Nationals are, and I know that German Marquez has not pitched well to this point this season, would you consider him at all as a contrarian option just for leverage purposes?
Yeah, for leverage purposes, and he does have that history. Looking at my crunch of 500, I don't currently have any shares of German Marquez, but yeah, I think that there is at least some argument to go there just because, what is his price tag at? I'm trying to find him in the
7,100. It is 7,100. So, and one thing I'll add also, this would be DK specific. It's hard to make this kind of stand on FanDuel on a single pitcher site. So 6,100 on FanDuel, it's a really cheap price point, but I still couldn't see myself getting to Marquez. 7,100 for an SP2 on DK. And also Marquez, a guy who's been talented and has had some success at Coors Field in the past. If I get to him in like 5 to 10% of lineups, I don't hate that for tournaments.
Yeah, he looks fine in the top pitchers tool, coming in at 0.5% ownership, 2.6% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers, 4.4% chance of being one of the top 2 value pitchers. I don't know that I'm going to get there. I'm probably not going to force him in there. I would have to give him, the thumbs up or boost his projection in Fantasy Cruncher to get there. I didn't get to a single share in my 500 crunch, and I don't know that I feel strongly enough about it to give him a boost, but I can see the argument for sure, just because he does have that history of success, and he's coming in at under 1% ownership, and it's a pretty small sample size so far this year. So I think if you want to look at his long track record and trust him a little bit more, then I think that is a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
All right, couple more games to talk about. The next one, we've got the Oakland A's on the slate. Just a really poor offense. Ryan Yarbrough on the mound for Tampa Bay. Well, this is the season debut for Yarbrough. He's been pitching in the minor leagues. So Tampa Bay Rays 3.9 implied team total for the Oakland A's 3.3. So we've seen some success from Ryan Yarbrough in the past, but he's also a pitcher who doesn't always go deep into games, and he hasn't pitched at the big league level to this point. I want to pull up, while I'm talking through this, what have been his pitch counts in AAA? How deep into games has he gone? That might help me inform some decisions here. All right, so minor league game logs for him. All right, here we go. 2 starts in the minor leagues this year for Ryan Yarbrough. All right, this is going to make for an easier decision point. He has pitched a third of an inning and 2 2/3 an inning. So Ryan Yarbrough, I think it's safe to assume, is not stretched out. He's not going to be going all that deep into the game. I was thinking maybe we could look at Ryan Yarbrough as an SP2 option on DK, but it's going to be hard for me to consider him when he went 2 2/3 of an inning in his last start. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's smart of you to look at his AAA pitch counts, because I was wondering, I was like, I'm going to wait for word on Ryan Yarbrough to hear what kind of pitch count he might be on. But yeah, it's probably a safe bet that he's not going to get a full allotment of pitches. I don't know if that would then make any long reliever interesting. If he's not going to pitch more than like 1 or 2 innings, then potentially somebody will come in. There's so many strikeouts in the Oakland lineup, but I currently have no idea who is going to be coming in after Ryan Yarbrough. Yeah, I think that it's probably safe to fade these pitchers unless we learn a little bit more about who's coming in. We do have him. We have Yarbrough projected for 13.2 fantasy points, which would give me some interest in him. But I think that that's probably going to come down once we factor in the pitch count. So yeah, I think probably no interest in the Tampa Bay pitchers unless we hear a little bit more before game time.
The absolute most, I would expect 4 innings out of Yarbrough. It's hard for me to consider a guy who, once again, has made 2 appearances so far in AAA and has gone a third of an inning and 2 2/3 of an inning. Once again, that's a slight increase from start 1 to start 2, but it's not that much work. I doubt he's all that stretched out. And we've seen Tampa Bay be pretty cautious with him at the past in some of these situations. It could just be a bullpen game also, where it's a bunch of guys that go 1 to 2 innings for Tampa Bay. Easy enough for me to write off Tampa Bay, but I'm probably going to be writing off the Oakland offense as well. The Rays do have a very, very good bullpen, and the Oakland A's do not have a good offense. The Oakland A's in our top stacks tool, the lowest probability of the top stack of any team on the slate, they have 1.2% projected ownership, and that has them being slightly overowned. I'm not going to want to get to Oakland. I'm not going to want to get to the Tampa Bay pitchers either. Is that kind of where you're at as well?
Yes, it is. Oakland, as you mentioned, lowest top stack odds on the slate. They're basically neutral, coming in at 1.2% ownership. So just a neutral play in the top stack tool. They have a 7.6% chance to be in the top value stack. So a little bit better in that sense, but I don't see myself getting to a ton of Oakland. I might get over the field, but that would be like 2% of Oakland, just because they're so low owned. It's just hard to really see a ton of upside with a team that is probably facing a bullpen game when that bullpen is really good. It's just hard to find a rhythm for teams in these bullpen games against good bullpen. So I think that it's a pretty low probability play. The only real reason that I would consider playing them is because they are relatively cheap and coming in at 1.2% ownership.
Yeah, and then on the other side, Paul Blackburn, who has really been terrible in the past, but has produced good numbers so far to start this year. So Paul Blackburn, who I can't buy into the small sample size of him so far this year. Once again, the 24.7% K rate, that's nice. 2.76 expected ERA, that's also really nice. But here are the numbers we had on Paul Blackburn last year. 5.87 ERA, 5.47 expected ERA for his career. A 5.18 ERA, a 4.31 FIP, 4.36 xFIP. This has historically never been a very good pitcher. So I don't want to get to Paul Blackburn, particularly not against the Tampa Bay Rays offense. Do you feel the same way? And are you looking to stack Tampa Bay against him at all?
Yes and yes. Paul Blackburn, no interest, 7,700, 0.8% ownership with a 7.3% chance of being one of the top two pitchers. That looks good. 7.6% chance of being a top two value. That looks good. So those are the reasons to play Paul Blackburn, but I just don't really think that the upside is there. In my 500 crunch, I got to a total of 4 shares against Paul Blackburn. I suspect in a 150 crunch, I'll get to 0, maybe 1 share. It's just, he's not a good enough pitcher. It's not a good enough matchup. There's really no reason to target Tampa Bay on an 11 game slate. So I don't see myself getting to Paul Blackburn, but then on the other side, I do like the Tampa Bay stack. 3.3% projected ownership, 3.4% chance of being a top stack, and then 4% chance of being the top value stack. So some positive leverage there. I'm definitely going to be getting to above the field on the Tampa Bay stack.
So my browser just crashed, but the good news is we only have one game to talk about. It's easy enough for me to remember what the game was and what pitchers were left in a one game to talk about here. So off the top of my head, it was the Los Angeles Dodgers at home against the San Francisco Giants. The lowest total on the entire slate, if I'm not mistaken, 6.5 runs. So we're not expecting much from the offenses on this slate because it's Julio Urias on the mound for the Dodgers. It's Carlos Rodon for the Giants. I'm still a little bitter that Rodon didn't pitch much in the second half of the season, didn't end up winning the AL Cy Young because I thought he was the best pitcher in the American League last year. And he has gotten off to a ridiculous start so far in the NL. His strikeout rate has been crazy high. I think he has something like at least 7 strikeouts in every start so far this year. His underlying numbers all have been really good. He had an expected ERA to this point, sub 2. Julio Urias, also a quality pitcher, but doesn't generate strikeouts at quite the same rate as Rodon. He's more around a 20% strikeout pitcher. So what are you going to be doing with the pitchers in this spot? And then particularly Rodon, who as good as he's been, also has one of the most difficult matchups possible against the Dodgers. So how are you going to handle both sides of that?
Yeah, so I'm going to really like Rodon here. I guess I can fill in some of these numbers for you since your browser crashed, but you provided me with the run sheet with the numbers on it. So I'll just read off. Carlos Rodon, 43.2% strikeout rate so far this year, 1.76 expected ERA, 0.83 whip. That's really good. And then he's not even coming in with a ton of ownership. People are, I mean, it makes sense. People are a little bit afraid of facing the Dodgers. As a result, though, he's coming in under owned, 21.2% ownership with a 21.5% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers. So slightly, I mean, it's very neutral. It's a little bit of the ownership is wrong a little bit one way or the other. He's positive leverage versus negative leverage. He is a neutral play. He is the most expensive pitcher on the slate, and he's facing the Dodgers. So that's going to scare people off, but it's not going to scare me off. I'm going to be over the field on Carlos Rodon just because of the upside for a pitcher who's coming in at not a ton of ownership relative to his talent.
And then what do you? Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, and then on the other side, I've consistently underrated the Giants offense. It's one that I did not think was going to be particularly good last year. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Giants, they had an over-under wins of like 71.5 last year. Not only did they far exceed that, they were the team that overachieved by the most. They ended up beating out the Dodgers to win the National League West. And when the Dodgers traded for Trey Turner and Max Scherzer last year, I had bet on them to win the division, and obviously that didn't come to fruition. And then this year I'm looking at like, surely the Giants can't be this good again. And they kind of have been to this point. So do you buy into the Giants offense at all? And would you be looking at them as what I assume is a contrarian stack against Julio Urias?
Yeah, they're coming in at 1.3% ownership with a 2.6% chance of being one of the top two, or sorry, the top stack on the slate, and a 2.3% chance of being the top value stack. So just relative to their ownership, they look really solid. They are a positive leverage stack. I'm planning to be over the field on the Giants going up against Julio Urias. Obviously, you don't love the matchup, but that's why you get them at such low ownership. So I'm happy to be above the field on the Giants. And then the Dodgers are actually pretty similar. So they're going up against Carlos Rodon. That's really suppressing the ownership. They're coming in at 1% owned, and they're the Dodgers. I mean, you don't see an offense this good. Terry refers to them as the NL All-Star team, and they really are that good. So 1% ownership, 2.6% chance of being the top stack. That's plenty of reason for me to get above the field on the Dodgers as well. Do you like the Dodgers bats here?
They're going to be that low owned. I think it's sensible, not to the point where like I would get to 5% Dodger stack, but if I could roster 2% Dodgers as a stack against Rodon, and that's going to mean that I'm going to be overweight to them, sure, like I have no issue with that, but it's not going to be a priority. But yeah, I'm most likely going to be overweight whenever I get an offense. And there's teams that are in this category. It's like the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the Dodgers. Whenever these teams, regardless of who the pitcher is, if they're 1-2%, I'm usually overweight to them, just like kind of as a blanket rule.
Yep, I think I'm generally the same way, and I think it makes sense on this slate.
All right. That is going to do it for us, guys. Also, check out the baseball show later that Terry and Neil are going to be doing together. We also got the NBA Deeper Dive, NBA Live Before Lock later in the day. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck. See you guys later.